he was just a single dad, cleaning up discarded tickets and spilled soda, trying to earn enough for rent he never imagined. The woman who stayed behind to help him pick up trash was the billionaire who owned the entire Carnival, and that this one small act of kindness would change both their lives forever. Before we dive in, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment. Where in the world are you watching from? The last of the music had faded an hour ago, a tinny ghost of a melody that now lingered only in the ringing of Leo's ears. The vibrant lights of the Midway had blinked out one by one, plunging the sprawling field into a landscape of skeletal metal and deep shadows. The air, once thick with the sweet, cloying smell of cotton candy and popcorn, now carried the sharper scent of damp earth, diesel fuel, and the faint, sour tang of leftover soda seeping into the grass. Leo was the last one left of the temporary cleanup crew. The others had clocked out the moment their shift ended, a hurried exodus of tired bodies eager for home and rest, but Leo stayed his worn work boots, treading a familiar, methodical path across the trampled grass. He moved with a quiet efficiency that came from years of making every minute count, one hand gripping a large black trash bag, the other wielding a long-handled grabber, plucking discarded napkins, half-eaten pretzels, and the sad, deflated remains of prize balloons from the ground. His daughter, Maya, was waiting for him at her grandmother's house, probably asleep by now, clutching the stuffed unicorn he'd won for her earlier that day. The unicorn had cost him $5 in a rigged ring toss game, $5 he should have saved for gas, but the look on her 7-year-old face when the carny handed it over a supernova of pure, unadulterated joy had been worth more than any bill in his wallet. This job, this 3-day stint of hauling trash and breaking down stalls, was supposed to be a small lifeline, a way to catch up on the rent that was already a week late, a way to keep the lights from flickering into a final ominous darkness. But as he worked, the weight of it all pressed down on him, heavier than the sack slung over his shoulder. Every crushed ticket was a reminder of an experience he couldn't afford for Maya, every abandoned toy, a symbol of the simple things he struggled to provide. He wasn't looking for pity. He hated pity more than he hated the gnawing emptiness in his fridge. He just wanted a foothold, a single, solid patch of ground, in a life that had felt like quicksand. Ever since his wife was gone, he paused, leaning against the cold metal frame of a dismantled hot dog stand, and rubbed his eyes. The calluses on his palms felt rough against his tired skin. He could feel the grit under his fingernails, a permanent resident no amount of soap could evict. He looked out across the dark, silent Carnival, a ghost of its former self, and felt a profound, aching loneliness. It was, in these quiet, late-night hours, after the world had gone to sleep, that the silence grew teeth. And for a brief, unguarded moment, Leo felt a familiar pang of despair, the kind that whispered that no matter how hard he worked, how much he sacrificed, it would never be quite enough. From the shadows of the grand carousel, its painted horses frozen mid-gallop, she watched him. Her name was Serafina, though no one here knew that. To the handful of senior staff who'd seen her that evening, she was just Sarah, a consultant from corporate, sent to observe operations. She'd shed her tailored blazer hours ago, trading it for a simple, unmarked gray hoodie, her meticulously styled hair now pulled back into a loose, unpretentious knot. She had walked these grounds 100 times, but always during the day, surrounded by the cacophony of cheerful noise, the buzz of commerce, the carefully engineered spectacle her company, Vance Entertainment, had perfected over 3 decades. But tonight was different. Tonight, she wanted to see the aftermath, the quiet bones of the beast. After the soul had departed, she came here seeking something, a flicker of the magic her father had built this empire on, a magic she now only saw on spreadsheets, and in quarterly reports. He'd started with a single Ferris wheel and a dream, and she'd turned it into a global phenomenon. But somewhere in the boardrooms and shareholder meetings, she had lost the plot. The joy had become a commodity, the wonder, a revenue stream, and she, the architect of it all, felt like the loneliest person in her own kingdom. Then she saw him, a lone figure, moving with a weary grace through the debris. His work was methodical, his posture one of quiet determination. He wasn't rushing. He was being thorough, cleaning a space that thousands had enjoyed and abandoned without a second thought. He was just a man doing a job. But there was a dignity in his labor that struck her, a stillness in his focus that felt more real than anything she'd experienced all day. He leaned against the stall, and even from a distance, she could see the exhaustion in the slump of his shoulders, the way he ran a hand over his face, as if to wipe away more than just sweat. Most people, she knew, saw a carnival as a place of escape, but for him, it was just another day's work, another battle in a war. She couldn't begin to imagine. She felt a strange, unfamiliar pull. Not pity, but a quiet, resonant empathy. It was the feeling of watching someone else carry a heavy weight and recognizing the shape of it. Even if the contents were unknown, she had security guards, a driver, a suite at the finest hotel in the city. And yet, in that moment, he seemed to have something she had lost, something solid, something real, something worth being tired for. She stayed in the shadows, a ghost in her own machine, and continued to watch. Unsure why she couldn't bring herself to leave, Leo pushed himself off the stall. The cold metal, a stark reminder of the work still left to do. He slung the heavy bag over his shoulder and began his slow trek toward the large dumpster parked near the service exit. The gravel crunched under his boots, the only sound in the vast empty field as he rounded the corner of the funhouse, with its garish, leering clown face now muted in the moonlight. He saw her, a woman standing near the darkened ticket booth. Her silhouette framed by the single security light that hummed overhead. She was looking down, her phone held loosely in one hand, its screen dark. Her other hand was patting the ground around her feet, a small, searching gesture. She looked up as he approached, her eyes wide and startled in the dim light. He hadn't noticed her before, and the sudden appearance of another person in this desolate landscape sent a brief jolt of caution through him. "Everything okay?" he asked, his voice rough from hours of silence. She seemed to relax at the sound of his voice, the tension in her shoulders easing slightly. I think I dropped an earring," she said, her voice soft but clear, carrying a polish that felt out of place amidst the trampled grass and discarded popcorn boxes. "It's not valuable, just sentimental. It was a gift." Leo glanced at the ground, a minefield of wrappers and mud. He set his trash bag down with a heavy thud. "What does it look like?" "Small," she said, taking a step closer. "Silver, a little star." He nodded, his eyes scanning the area around the booth. He didn't have time for this. He was tired, his back ached. And Maya was waiting, but his mother had raised him to help, and some lessons were etched too deep to ignore. He clicked on the small flashlight on his keychain, its beam weak but focused, and began a slow, methodical search. She knelt beside him, her own movements less certain, her hands brushing over the debris with a hesitant daintiness. "You don't have to do this," she said, her voice closer now. "It's probably long gone." "Might as well look," he replied, his gaze fixed on the ground. "Can't hurt." They worked in silence for a few minutes, two strangers on their hands and knees under a lone security light, searching for a tiny piece of silver in a sea of forgotten fun. Her proximity was unnerving and yet calming. She smelled faintly of something clean, like rain and expensive soap, a stark contrast to the grime on his own clothes. He could see the fine knit of her sweater, the simple, elegant line of her boots. She was clearly not from around here, not from his world of temp jobs and overdue bills. Then his light caught it, a tiny glint of silver nestled beside a crushed paper cup. He reached for it, his calloused fingers carefully plucking it from the dirt. "This it?" he asked. Holding it out on his palm, Serafina looked up, her face softening with genuine surprise. "Yes," she breathed. "That's it. I can't believe you found it." Leo just shrugged and placed the earring in her outstretched hand. Her fingers brushed his for a fraction of a second, a spark of warmth against the cold night air that was surprisingly potent. "Thank you," she said, her eyes meeting his, and for the first time, he saw past the elegant stranger. She wasn't just a woman who had lost an earring. She was someone who looked profoundly, achingly grateful for a small act of kindness. He didn't know it. But the earring wasn't real. She hadn't dropped anything. It was a test, a pretense, an excuse to talk to the man whose quiet dignity had captivated her from the shadows, and he had passed it without a moment's hesitation. His sincerity. A beacon in the manufactured world she inhabited. "It's nothing," Leo said, standing up and brushing the dirt from his jeans. "Glad I could help." He turned to grab his trash bag, ready to end the interaction and return to his solitary work, but her voice stopped him. "Wait," she said, and there was a new note in it. Something less like relief and more like a quiet plea. He turned back to her. She had stood up as well, clutching the small earring in her hand like it was a precious stone. "At least, let me give you something for your trouble," she said, reaching. Into the pocket of her hoodie, he shook his head before she could even pull her hand out. "No, that's not necessary. It was just a few minutes." Her hand froze. "Please." "I insist. I don't take money for being a decent human being," he said, and the words came out firmer than he intended, a reflexive defense of the one thing he had left that wasn't for sale. His pride. He saw a flicker of something in her eye, a surprise, maybe even respect. It wasn't the reaction he expected from someone who looked like they were used to getting their way. "Okay," she said softly, letting her hand fall back to her side. "I understand." They stood in a strange, suspended silence, the hum of the security light filling the space between them. He should have walked away, but something held him there, her quiet composure, the way she looked at him, not with pity, but with a genuine, unnerving curiosity. "I'm Sarah, by the way," she said, extending a hand, this time not for payment, but for connection. "Leo," he replied, taking her hand briefly. His was rough and calloused against her smooth, soft skin. The contrast was stark. A silent conversation about the different lives they led. "You work for the Carnival?" she asked, her gaze drifting over the darkened rides. "Just clean-up crew," he said with a shrug. "Temporary gig helps pay the bills. It's a lot of work for one person." The rest of the crew went home. "I like to finish the job right," he said, the statement simple, factual, but it spoke volumes about who he was. She nodded slowly, her eyes thoughtful. "My father always said the way a person finishes a job says more about them than how they start it." There was a wistful note in her voice, a hint of a story he didn't know. "He sounds like a smart man," Leo said. "He was," she replied, a shadow passing over her features. She seemed to catch herself, shaking off the melancholy with a small, almost imperceptible shift in her posture. "So, what do you do when you're not saving lost earrings and single-handedly cleaning up after thousands of people?" The question was light, teasing, and it caught him off guard. He let out a short, humorless laugh. "Mostly I'm a dad. My daughter, Maya, she's 7. Serafina's expression softened instantly. "Oh, a dad. That's the most important job of all." "It's the only one that matters," he agreed, his own voice softening as he thought of Maya's sleeping face. The fierce, protective love he felt for her was the anchor in his tumultuous world. It was the reason he was out here in the cold, picking up other people's trash, and the reason he would do it again tomorrow without complaint. "She loves this place," he added, gesturing to the silent carnival grounds. "To her, it's the most magical place on earth." "Is that what you see?" Sarah asked quietly, her gaze sweeping over the same scene. A ghost town of fleeting joy. Leo followed her gaze, seeing it through her eyes for a moment. The peeling paint on the funhouse, the rust on the Ferris wheel's bolts, the inherent loneliness of a place built for noise and crowds now surrendered to silence. "I see a paycheck," he said honestly. "But when I look at her, I see the magic she sees. That's enough for me." His words hung in the air, simple and profound, and Serafina felt them resonate in a place deep inside her that she had long thought was empty. She, who had every material thing the world could offer, was standing in front of a man who had next to nothing, and he was the one who understood what magic really was. It wasn't in the bright lights or the thrilling rides, it was in seeing the world through the eyes of someone you love. The quiet moment was broken by the crunch of small footsteps on the gravel path. A little voice, still thick with sleep, called out into the darkness, "Daddy?" Leo's head snapped up, his entire posture shifting from weary worker to alert father in a split second. "Maya?" he called back, his voice a mixture of concern and surprise. "What are you doing here, sweetie?" Maya emerged from the shadows near the carousel, a small, pajama-clad figure, clutching a worn, one-eyed stuffed rabbit. Her hair was a tangled mess, and her cheeks were flushed from the cold. "I woke up, and you weren't home yet," she said, her lower lip trembling just slightly. "Grandma said you'd be back soon, but I missed you, and Barnaby was scared." Leo crossed the distance between them in a few quick strides, scooping her up into his arms and wrapping his jacket around her small, shivering frame. "It's okay. Baby girl, I'm almost done. I'm right here," he murmured, his voice a low, soothing rumble against her ear. He held her tight, his entire world condensing into that one small, precious armful from a few feet away. Serafina watched the scene unfold, her heart clenching with an emotion she couldn't name. The raw, unguarded love between them was so palpable it was almost a physical force in the cold night air. It was a world away from the polite, transactional relationships she was used to, a world away from the sterile affection of her own childhood. Maya peeked over her father's shoulder, her wide, curious eyes landing on Sarah. "Who's that?" she whispered, her voice muffled by Leo's jacket. Leo turned, his expression softening as he looked at Sarah. "This is Sarah, sweetie." She was just leaving, but Sarah didn't move. She took a hesitant step forward, her hands tucked into the pockets of her hoodie as if she didn't know what to do with them. "Hi, Maya," she said softly. "It's very nice to meet you and Barnaby." Maya studied her for a long moment with the unnerving, unfiltered scrutiny of a child. Her gaze was so direct, it made Sarah feel more seen than she had in any boardroom. "You look sad," Maya said, her voice clear and matter-of-fact. The simple, honest observation struck Serafina with the force of a physical blow. No one had ever said that to her. Not her assistants, not her board members, not the succession of therapists her father had hired for her over the years. They all saw the competence, the poise, the power. They never saw the profound, cavernous loneliness. Hiding just beneath the surface, Leo's arm tightened around his daughter. "Maya, that's not a polite thing to say." "It's okay," Sarah said, her voice a little shaky. She forced a smile, though she knew it didn't reach her eyes. "She's a very observant little girl." "Are you lost?" Maya asked, her brow furrowed with genuine concern. "Daddy says people get sad when they're lost." For a second, Serafina had no answer. The question was too big, too true. She had a GPS in her car, a map of the world on her phone, a private jet on standby, and yet she was more lost than she had ever been in her life. "Something like that," she finally whispered, the admission costing her more than she would have expected. She looked at Leo, at the way he held his daughter, at the small, self-contained universe they had built together out of love and necessity, and she felt a pang of longing so sharp it almost made her gasp. He was a man picking up trash to make ends meet, and she was a billionaire who owned the ground he was standing on. But in that moment she knew, with a certainty that was both terrifying and liberating, that he was the one who wasn't lost at all. The interaction lingered in Serafina's mind long after she had driven away from the silent carnival grounds. She replayed the scene in her head as she sat in the sterile quiet of her hotel suite, a sprawling space with panoramic views of a city that felt alien and cold. The little girl's words echoed in the silence. "You look sad. Are you lost?" She had spent a decade building walls around her heart, constructing a fortress of competence and control so impenetrable that even she sometimes forgot what was inside. But a 7-year-old girl had seen right through it. In less than a minute she stood at the brant, floor-to-ceiling window, looking down at the river of headlights below. A world of people going somewhere. Belonging somewhere. She thought of Leo, of the grit on his hands and the quiet dignity in his eyes. He was a man who knew exactly who he was and what he was fighting for. His world was small, perhaps, but it was anchored in a love so fierce. It was its own form of wealth. Her own world, in contrast, felt vast and empty. A kingdom of glass and steel, where connection was a liability and vulnerability was a weakness. She had inherited an empire, but he had inherited a purpose. She picked up her phone, the screen lighting up with a cascade of notifications, emails from her board, texts from her personal assistant, alerts from news outlets tracking her company's stock, a life of constant, meaningless noise. She ignored them all, and instead did something she hadn't done in years. She searched for something real. She didn't know his last name, didn't know where he lived, but she remembered the name of the temp agency stitched on the side of his uniform from a brief glimpse under the security light. It was a long shot, a desperate, foolish impulse. But she needed to know more. She needed to understand why a chance encounter with a stranger in a dark field had shaken the foundations of the world she had so carefully built for herself. The next morning, the sun streamed into Leo's small apartment, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air and the faint cracks in the plaster walls. It was a world away from the artificial magic of the carnival here. The magic was of a different kind. The quiet miracle of making it through another day. Maya sat at their small, wobbly kitchen table, diligently coloring a picture of the unicorn he'd won for her. Its single eye was now a vibrant, scribbled blue, and it was surrounded by a rainbow of lopsided stars. Leo stood at the stove, watching the water for their oatmeal slowly come to a boil. They were almost out of milk, and the bread was down to its last 2 heels. But for this morning, they had enough. He was tired, a deep, bone-weary fatigue that had settled in his marrow. But watching Maya hum to herself, her small face a mask of concentration, he felt a familiar surge of resolve. It would be okay. He would make it okay. A sharp knock on the door startled them both. Leo frowned, wiping his hands on a dish towel. They rarely had visitors, especially not this early. He opened the door to find a courier, a young man in a crisp uniform holding a clipboard and a large flat envelope. For Leo, the courier squinted at the name on the package. "Stone?" "It's Stanton," Leo corrected, his brow furrowed with confusion. "I wasn't expecting anything." "Payroll delivery from Vance Entertainment," the courier said, handing him the envelope and a stylus to sign. "Looks like a bonus payment." Leo stared at the envelope, the Vance Entertainment logo embossed in sleek silver letters in the corner. His heart began to beat a little faster. He had only worked there for 3 days. Why would they be sending him a bonus? He took the envelope inside, his fingers trembling slightly. As he tore it open, inside was a check and a short, typed note. "For outstanding dedication and service, your commitment did not go unnoticed." The amount on the check made him stop breathing. It wasn't a small bonus. It was $5,000 more than he made in 3 months. It was rent. For the rest of the year, it was a new transmission for his aging car. It was groceries, real groceries, with fresh fruit and maybe even a steak. It was a lifeline, a miracle, a mistake. It had to be a mistake. He sank into a kitchen chair, the check held loosely in his hand. His mind reeling. Vance Entertainment. They were the owners of the carnival, the company Sarah had. Sarah, he thought of her. Of the lost earring, of the quiet intensity in her eyes. Had she done this? The thought was both thrilling and terrifying. Was this her idea of a thank you? A quiet act of charity from a woman who could probably lose a check this size in her couch cushions and never notice the pride that was so intrinsically part of him rose up, hot and sharp. He hadn't asked for this. He didn't want her pity. He wanted to earn his way, to stand on his own 2 feet. But then he looked over at Maya, who was now carefully cutting out her drawing. Oblivious to the storm raging inside him, he saw her worn-out shoes by the door. Remembered the way her face fell when he said they couldn't afford the art class she wanted to join. Pride didn't pay the bills. Pride didn't buy new shoes. Pride didn't keep the lights on. He folded the checks slowly. The crisp paper, a heavy weight in his hand. He didn't know what this meant, or who was truly behind it, but in the harsh light of his reality, it was an answer to a prayer. He had been too tired to even whisper. Serafina sat in a sleek, minimalist office on the 40th floor, a space that was technically hers, but had never felt like a home. The city sprawled below her, a silent, glittering tapestry of ambition and concrete. Her head of finance, a man named Marcus, with a perpetually worried expression, had just left after confirming the anonymous bonus had been processed through a discretionary fund. Untraceable. Back to her directly, she had told him it was for an exemplary contract employee. A vague but plausible explanation that required no further details, but now, alone in the silence, she felt a knot of anxiety tighten in her chest. Had she done the right thing? Or had she just confirmed every negative stereotype about her world, swooping in with a checkbook to solve a problem that wasn't hers to fix? She hadn't done it out of pity that much. She knew it was a gesture of respect for the man who had shown her more integrity in one night than she'd seen in a year of boardroom meetings. It was a way of leveling a playing field that was so profoundly, unfairly tilted, but she knew him, even from their brief encounter, enough to know that his pride was a fortress he wouldn't take charity. And if he ever found out the money came from her, it might destroy the fragile, unnamed connection that had sparked between them, a connection she found herself replaying in her mind with a startling frequency. She thought of Maya, of her clear, honest eyes, and her simple, devastating questions that had sliced through years of Serafina's carefully constructed defenses in Maya. She saw a childhood she'd never had, and where a father's presence was the greatest treasure, where love wasn't measured in trust funds or European vacations, but in shared bowls of oatmeal and a $5 stuffed unicorn. Her own father had given her a company. He hadn't known how to give her his time. Her phone buzzed, pulling her from her thoughts. It was a text from her private investigator, the one she had hired with a pang of guilt to find out more about Leo Stanton. The message was brief. Subject's full name is Leo Stanton, former carpenter. Widower daughter's name is Maya Stanton, age 7. Currently resides at 182 Oak Street. Apartment tube. Serafina stared at the address. A simple string of words that felt more real, more grounded than the skyscraper she was sitting in. She knew she shouldn't. She knew it was crossing a line, blurring the boundaries between a chance encounter and something more deliberate. But the pull was too strong. She wanted to see his world, to understand the life of the man who had, in one short night, made her question the entire architecture of her own. She closed her laptop. Her decision made. She wasn't going to interfere, wasn't going to announce herself. She just needed to see it for herself, to know that the quiet dignity she'd witnessed wasn't just a fleeting moment in the dark, but a way of life that truly existed somewhere beyond her gilded cage. The drive to Oak Street was a journey through worlds. Serafina's driver navigated the sleek black car from the gleaming, high-rise canyons of the financial district to the older, quieter neighborhoods where the buildings were made of brick instead of glass, and the trees had been there long enough to have history. Oak Street was a modest, tree-lined road, the kind of place where kids' bikes were left on front lawns, and the paint on the porches was peeling in a way that spoke of lives lived, not of neglect. As they pulled up across from number 182, a 3-story brick apartment building with worn steps and sturdy, unadorned windows, Serafina felt her heart beat a little faster. This was it. This was his home. From the tinted windows of her car, she watched as Leo and Maya emerged from the front door. Leo was wearing the same worn jacket from the Carnival, his shoulders set with a familiar, weary determination. He was holding Maya's hand, and she was skipping beside him, her backpack bouncing with each step. the one-eyed rabbit peeking out from a side pocket. They didn't get into a car. They walked down the block to a bus stop. Waiting together on the small wooden bench, Leo leaned down and said something to Maya, pointing to her shoe. And she laughed, a bright, carefree sound that Serafina couldn't hear but could feel in that moment. They were just a father and a daughter, a small, resilient unit against the vastness of the world. Serafina watched until the bus arrived with a hiss of its brakes, and they climbed aboard. Disappearing from her view, she stayed in the car long after they were gone. The silence inside the luxury vehicle, a stark contrast to the simple, vibrant life she had just witnessed. There was no grandeur on Oak Street, no visible signs of wealth or power, but there was a richness here that her penthouse on the 50th floor could never replicate. It was the richness of connection, of shared struggles, of a love that was a shield against the world's sharp edges. She had sent him a check, a sterile paper solution to a problem she assumed was purely financial, but watching him with his daughter, she realized she had misunderstood. His poverty wasn't just a lack of money, it was a life lived without a safety net. A life where every small joy was hard-won, and every setback was a potential catastrophe. Her money could patch a hole, but it couldn't mend the fabric of his life. And for the first time, Serafina felt the true, staggering weight of her own helplessness. She, who could buy almost anything, couldn't buy him peace of mind, couldn't restore what he had lost, couldn't give him the one thing he truly needed, a partner to share the load. As the driver pulled the car away from the curb, Serafina made a decision, a quiet, internal shift that would alter the course of her life. She wasn't going to be an anonymous benefactor anymore. She wasn't going to watch from a distance. If she was going to be in their lives, she had to be in it. Not as a wealthy heiress, but as Sarah, a person willing to step out of the shadows and risk being seen for who she truly was, not what she owned a week past. And the $5,000 check sat in a drawer in Leo's kitchen. Undeposited, he had taken it out a dozen times, his thumb brushing over the sleek Vance Entertainment logo. A mix of pride and practicality warring within him. He knew he should deposit it. He knew it was the smart, responsible thing to do for Maya, but something held him back, a stubborn, innate refusal to accept what felt like a handout. A silent judgment on his inability to provide. He told himself he'd do it tomorrow, then the next day, and the next. In the meantime, he picked up a few extra shifts at a local warehouse. The work mind-numbing, but the pay immediate. Even if it was just enough to cover groceries for the week. He was unloading a truck late one afternoon. When his phone buzzed in his pocket, it was a text from an unknown number. "Hi. It's Sarah from the Carnival. I hope this isn't too forward, but I was wondering if you and Maya might be free this weekend. I have 2 tickets to the city zoo that are going to go to waste." Leo stared at the message, his heart giving a jolt that had nothing to do with the heavy boxes he was lifting. The zoo tickets. It was a casual, friendly offer, but he knew, with a sinking certainty, that it was more than that. It was another gesture from her world, another reminder of the chasm between them. He could picture her now, effortlessly procuring tickets, thinking of it as a small, simple thing, while for him, a trip to the zoo was a luxury he hadn't been able to consider. In years, he typed and deleted 3 different responses. A polite refusal, a blunt question about the bonus check, a simple no. Finally, he settled on honesty, or at least a version of it. "Thanks for the offer, but we're a bit busy this weekend." He hit send, the lie feeling heavy on his thumbs. A moment later, she replied, "Another time, perhaps? I find myself with a lot of free time lately, and not enough people to spend it with." Her honesty disarmed him. Again, she wasn't pushing, she was just open. He thought of her standing alone in the dark carnival, of Maya's innocent observation, that she looked sad. Maybe she wasn't offering charity. Maybe she was just lonely. That evening, as he tucked Maya into bed, she held up the drawing she'd made at the kitchen table a few days before. It was a picture of the 3 of them, standing under the Ferris wheel. Leo and Maya were holding hands, and on the other side of him was Sarah, a faint, hesitant smile on her crayon face. "I miss the Carnival lady," Maya said, her voice soft and sleepy. "She was nice to Barnaby." Leo's throat tightened. "Yeah, sweetie." She was. He kissed her forehead, turned off the light, and stood in the doorway for a long moment. The image of the drawing burned into his mind. He had been so focused on his own pride, on the perceived slight of her wealth, that he hadn't considered what she might need. He had seen her as a potential threat to his carefully guarded independence, not as a person who might be just as lost as he was. He walked back to the kitchen, pulled out his phone, and typed a new message, his thumbs moving with a newfound certainty. "You know, I think our weekend just opened up. If the offer for the zoo still stands, we'd love to go." The reply came almost instantly. "It stands. How does Saturday sound?" Leo smiled, a real smile for the first time all day, and typed back, "Saturday sounds perfect." The air at the city zoo was a vibrant mix of sounds and smells. The distant roar of a lion, the chatter of children, the earthy scent of hay and damp soil. It was a world of contained wilderness. A place Leo hadn't brought Maya since she was a toddler. They stood near the entrance, Maya vibrating with an excitement so intense it was almost a physical force. She wore her favorite purple jacket, her one-eyed rabbit clutched in her hand, her eyes darting everywhere at once. Leo felt a familiar pang of love and guilt. He should have brought her here sooner. He should have been able to provide these simple joys without the help of a near stranger. Then he saw her walking. Toward them, from the main gate, Sarah was dressed down in jeans and a simple, cream-colored sweater, her hair tied back in a ponytail. She wore a pair of comfortable-looking sneakers. A stark contrast to the elegant boots she'd worn at the carnival. She looked normal almost, and yet there was an undeniable poise in the way she moved, a quiet confidence that set her apart from the bustling crowds. She smiled as she approached, a genuine, warm smile that seemed to erase the awkwardness of their text exchange. "Hi," she said, her gaze moving from Leo to Maya. "I'm so glad you could make it." "We wouldn't miss it," Leo replied, his own voice steadier than he expected. Maya, usually shy with new people, ran forward and hugged Sarah's legs. "Are we going to see the monkeys first? I love monkeys. They're like tiny, hairy people." Sarah laughed, a rich, uninhibited sound that made Leo's heart do a strange, unfamiliar flip. She knelt down to Maya's level, her expression soft. "We can see whatever you want to see today. You're the boss." As they walked toward the primate house, Maya, chattering nonstop about the different kinds of monkeys she'd learned about in school, Leo and Sarah fell into a comfortable silence. He watched the way Sarah listened to Maya, her head tilted, her full attention on the little girl's rambling stories. She didn't patronize her or offer placating smiles. She engaged with her, asking questions, laughing at her jokes, treating her like a person whose thoughts mattered. It was a small thing, but to Leo, it was everything throughout the day. He found himself relaxing in a way he hadn't in years. He forgot about the unpaid bills, the worn-out tires on his car, the constant, low-grade hum of anxiety that was the soundtrack to his life for a few hours. He was just a dad at the zoo with his daughter and a woman who made him feel, inexplicably, like he wasn't carrying the weight of the world alone. They watched sea lions glide through the water, shared a bag of overpriced popcorn, and stood in awe before the majestic, pacing tigers. Sarah told stories about her own childhood visits to this very zoo, stories that were tinged with a quiet loneliness of being there with nannies instead of parents, of observing the animals with a scientific curiosity rather than a child's wonder. Leo, in turn, found himself opening up, telling her about his wife, about the way she had loved the giraffes, about the silly songs she used to sing to Maya. They weren't just two strangers making small talk anymore. They were sharing pieces of themselves, building a fragile bridge across the chasm of their different lives. Late in the afternoon, as they sat on a bench near the flamingo exhibit, watching the ridiculously pink birds stand on one leg, Maya fell asleep, her head resting on Leo's lap, Her small body finally surrendering to the day's excitement, Sarah looked over, her smile gentle. "She's worn out." "She's perfect," Leo said, his hand resting lightly on Maya's back. "Thank you for this, Sarah, for all of it." "It was my pleasure," she replied, her voice soft. "I can't remember the last time I had this much fun." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and saw past the wealth, the poise, the mysterious background. He saw a woman who was kind and funny and maybe just a little bit broken, just like him. "I still have that check." "You know," he said, the words coming out before he could stop them. "I haven't deposited it." Sarah's smile faded slightly, her gaze dropping to her hands. "I figured you hadn't. I can't take it." "Sarah, it doesn't feel right." "It wasn't charity, Leo," she said, her eyes meeting his again. "It was respect. And maybe," she hesitated, "maybe it was an excuse to see you again." Her admission hung in the air between them, honest and vulnerable, and in that moment, Leo knew that this was something more than a day at the zoo. It was the beginning of something he wasn't sure he was ready for, but desperately, terrifyingly, wanted after the zoo. A subtle shift occurred. The invisible line between their two worlds began to blur. Sarah started showing up in their lives, in small, unassuming ways. She'd text Leo with a casual, "I'm near your neighborhood. Need anything from the store?" Or she'd appear at the park where Maya played after school, a book in her hand, pretending she just needed some fresh air, but Leo knew she was there for them, and for the first time, he didn't question it. He started looking forward to her texts, to the quiet moments of conversation they would steal while Maya chased pigeons or swung on the monkey bars one rainy Tuesday afternoon. He was working on a small carpentry project in the shared basement of his apartment building, wobbly bookshelf he was trying to fix for his elderly neighbor. When he heard footsteps on the concrete stairs, Sarah appeared at the bottom. Holding 2 cups of coffee and a small paper bag, she wore a simple raincoat, her hair damp and curling around her face. She looked so out of place in the dusty, dimly lit basement, and yet she seemed completely at ease. "I brought a peace offering," she said, holding up the coffee. "I figured you could use a break." "You figured right," he said, accepting a cup their fingers brushed. And the familiar spark was there, a quiet current that seemed to flow between them whenever they were close. "What's in the bag?" he asked, nodding toward it. "Donuts," she said with a grin. "The kind with sprinkles. I'm told they're a favorite of a certain 7-year-old I know." He laughed. A real, easy laugh. "You're spoiling her." "Someone has to," she replied, her tone light but her eyes serious. She sat on an overturned crate, watching him work, the silence comfortable and familiar. "What are you building?" she asked. "Fixing," he corrected. "It's a bookshelf. For Mrs. Henderson upstairs. Her old one gave up the ghost." Sarah watched his hands as he worked, the way they moved, with a confident, practiced skill. Sanding a rough edge, tightening a loose joint, she saw the strength and precision in them, a stark contrast to the world of men she knew, men whose hands were soft from signing checks and shaking on deals. "You're good at that," she said quietly. "At fixing things." "It's what I do." He shrugged. "I like making things whole again." The words had a double meaning, and they both knew it. He wasn't just talking about the bookshelf, he was talking about his life, about the shattered pieces he was trying to reassemble every single day. Sarah didn't say anything, but a deep, resonant understanding passed between them. She had spent her life acquiring things, building an empire of assets and influence. He had spent his life mending things, finding value in what was broken and making it useful again. She sipped her coffee, a profound realization dawning on her. She had always thought of herself as the powerful one, the one with all the resources. But as she sat in that dusty basement, watching him patiently restore a piece of old forgotten furniture, she knew that he was the one who possessed the real strength, the quiet, unshakable power of a man who knew how to build a life from the pieces that were left behind. The tentative dance between them continued for weeks, a series of quiet moments and unspoken understandings. They never talked about their futures, never defined what was growing between them. They simply existed in a fragile, hopeful present, a bubble of normalcy that Leo was terrified to pop, and Serafina was reluctant to leave. But the real world, with its harsh lines and inconvenient truths, was never far away. It arrived in the form of a sleek, silver sedan that pulled up in front of Leo's apartment building. One crisp, autumn evening, Leo was walking Maya home from the park, when he saw it parked at the curb. Its polished chrome glinting under the streetlights, a man in a tailored suit stood beside it, his posture stiff, his expression impatient. He looked at Leo and Maya with a dismissive glance before his eyes fixed on someone emerging from the building's entrance. It was Sarah. She wore the jeans and sweater she'd had on earlier, but her face was tight, her posture rigid, the easy warmth she shared with them replaced by a cool, professional mask. "Madam," the man said, his voice clipped and formal, "we're late for the call with the Tokyo office." Sarah didn't look at him, her eyes were on Leo, and in them he saw a flash of panic, of regret. "I'm sorry," she murmured, her voice just for him. "I have to go." Leo just nodded. His throat suddenly tight, he pulled Maya a little closer, a protective gesture he wasn't even aware of, making the man in the suit open the car door for Sarah. And she slid inside without a backward glance. The car pulled away from the curb with a smooth, silent acceleration, leaving Leo and Maya standing on the sidewalk in a cloud of expensive exhaust. "Who was that, Daddy?" Maya asked, her small voice cutting through the sudden silence. "That," Leo said, his own voice sounding distant to his ears, "was her other life." He watched the taillights disappear around the corner, and the fragile bubble they had been living in burst, leaving him with the cold, sharp reality of who she was and who he wasn't. She was a woman with drivers and calls to Tokyo. He was a man who rode the bus and worried about the price of milk he had let himself believe, for a little while, that the chasm between their worlds could be bridged, but as he stood on that quiet street, the gap felt wider and more insurmountable than ever before. The sleek car sped through the city, a silent, climate-controlled capsule carrying Serafina away from the one place she had started to feel at home. She stared out the window, the warm, familiar lights of Leo's neighborhood giving way to the cold, impersonal glare of the downtown core. Her driver, a man named Arthur, who had been with her family for years, remained silent, his eyes fixed on the road, but she could feel his disapproval. Like a physical presence beside her in the back seat was Marcus, her head of finance. The man who had tracked her down with the urgency of a bloodhound. He held a tablet, its screen glowing with charts and figures, a world of data that felt a million miles away from the park swings and sprinkled donuts of her afternoon. "The board is getting restless, Serafina," Marcus said. His tone, a carefully calibrated mix of concern and admonishment. "Your extended sabbatical is causing a ripple effect. Investors are nervous. The press is speculating it's time to come back." "I'm not ready," she said, her voice flat, her eyes still on the blur of the city outside. "Ready or not, the company needs its leader," he pressed. "Your father's legacy is at stake." At the mention of her father, a familiar anger flared in her chest. "My father's legacy is a company that forgot how to be human," she retorted, her voice sharper now. "It's a machine that values profit over people, and I will not be another cog in it." Marcus sighed, a long-suffering sound she knew well. "Be that as it may, it's the machine that pays for all of this." He gestured vaguely at the luxurious interior of the car, at the life she had been born into. The unspoken message was clear. You can't have it both ways. You can't play at a simple life, in a quiet neighborhood, while the empire you're responsible for begins to show cracks. She fell silent, the fight draining out of. She knew he was right. In a way, she couldn't escape who she was. The name Vance was a brand, a responsibility, a cage she had been trying to flee from, but its bars were longer and stronger than she had imagined. She thought of Leo, awful, of the look on his face when he saw her with Arthur and the car. It wasn't anger or jealousy, it was a quiet, resigned understanding, a look that said, "I knew it was too good to be true." That look hurt more than any of Marcus's lectures. She had tried so hard to be just Sarah, to build something real and untethered to her wealth. But in one swift moment, her other life had crashed into theirs, shattering the illusion she had so carefully nurtured. When they arrived at the gleaming high-rise that housed her penthouse, she stepped out of the car and walked into the marble lobby without a word. She didn't look back at Marcus, didn't acknowledge Arthur. She just moved forward, her steps echoing in the vast, empty space, feeling more like a prisoner returning to her cell than an heiress returning to her castle. She had run away to find herself, but it seemed her old life had found her first, and it was pulling her back with a force she wasn't sure she had the strength to fight anymore. The days following Sarah's abrupt departure were heavy with a silence that felt different from the usual quiet of Leo's life. It was an absence, a space where laughter and conversation used to be. Maya was the first to name it. "Is Sarah mad at us?" she asked one evening, pushing her green beans around her plate. "No, sweetie," Leo said, his voice gentle but strained. "She's just busy. She has a very important job, remember?" Maya looked down at her plate, her small shoulders slumping. "I miss her." "Me too," Leo admitted, the words slipping out before he could catch them. It was the truth, a simple, aching truth that had taken up residence in his chest. He missed her easy laughter, her quiet intelligence, the way she looked at him like he was someone of value, not someone to be pitied or fixed. He found himself checking his phone constantly, hoping for a text, a call, any sign that the world that had swallowed her up hadn't erased him completely. But there was nothing, just a profound, echoing silence. He tried to throw himself into his work, taking on extra shifts, fixing a neighbor's leaky faucet, building a set of shelves for the local library. He kept his hands busy to quiet his mind. But at night, when the exhaustion set in, the thoughts would return. He would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying their time together, searching for clues, for a sign that what they had was real, and not just a temporary escape for a lonely, rich woman. His pride, which had been soothed by her genuine affection, now reared its head again, whispering poisonous doubts in his ear. Had he just been a project, a brief, interesting diversion from her real life? A blue-collar curiosity for a woman who had everything? The questions gnawed at him, eroding the fragile confidence he had started to build. One afternoon, while cleaning out his wallet, he found the check she had given him, still folded, still undeposited. He had forgotten about it, and the sight of it now felt like a slap in the face. It was a stark, tangible reminder of the world she came from, a world of easy solutions and financial power that was so alien to his own. In a moment of frustration and hurt, he almost tore it up, but he stopped, his fingers hesitating on the crisp paper. This check wasn't just about the money anymore. It was a symbol of everything that stood between them, of the chasm he wasn't sure could ever be crossed. He put the check back in the drawer, but this time he didn't close it. He left it slightly ajar, a silent, unresolved question. In the quiet of his kitchen, he didn't know if he was waiting for her to come back or for himself to finally let go back. In her gilded cage, Serafina was drowning in a sea of obligations, board meetings, investor calls, strategic planning sessions. She moved through her days like an automaton, her face a carefully composed mask of competence, her voice steady and professional. She was playing the part of Serafina Vance, CEO, with flawless precision, but inside she felt hollowed out, a ghost haunting her own life. The city that had once felt like the center of the universe now felt like a prison. Its glittering lights seemed to mock her, its endless noise a constant reminder of the quiet, genuine connection she had left behind. She missed the scent of sawdust in Leo's basement workshop, the sound of Maya's laughter in the park, the simple, profound feeling of being seen for who she was, not what she represented. One night, unable to sleep, she found herself in her father's old study, a room she had avoided for years. It was a museum of his ambition, filled with leather-bound books, framed accolades, and photographs of him shaking hands with powerful men. On a small, cluttered desk, she found a box of old home videos, dusty and unlabeled. On a whim, She pulled out the old projector and threaded a reel through it. The film flickered to life, casting grainy, silent images on the wall. A younger version of her father, his face relaxed and smiling, was pushing a little girl on a swing. The girl's hair was a wild, tangled mess, and she was laughing, her head thrown back in pure, unadulterated joy. That little girl was her Serafina watched, her throat tight as the scenes unfolded. A birthday party with a lopsided homemade cake. A trip to a carnival, not one of hers, but a small traveling fair, where her father won her a cheap, stuffed bear. A quiet afternoon spent building a clumsy, crooked treehouse in their backyard. These were memories she had buried, moments of a simpler, happier time before the company had grown into a behemoth, before her father had become a CEO first and a father second. Watching the silent, flickering images, she realized something profound. Her father hadn't started out as the cold, distant man. She remembered he had been a man who knew how to find joy in the small things, a man who loved his daughter fiercely, but somewhere along the way, he had lost himself in the pursuit of more, in the pursuit of an empire. He had forgotten how to be a king of his own small, precious kingdom. Tears streamed down her face as she watched. Tears of grief for the father she had lost and the childhood she had forgotten. She saw now that she wasn't just running from the company. She was running from the fear of becoming him, of letting the weight of an empire crush the placid person she was meant to be. She knew then what she had to do. She couldn't abandon her legacy, but she couldn't let it define her either. She had to find a way to integrate her two worlds, to be both Serafina Vance, the capable leader, and Sarah, the woman who found joy in a shared donut and the sound of a child's laughter. Her first step was to pick up the phone, not to call a board member, but to call the one person who had shown her what real strength looked like. But his number, when she dialed it, went straight to voicemail, a polite, impersonal recording that felt like a closed door. The news story broke on a Wednesday morning, a small article in the business section that Leo stumbled upon while scrolling through his phone at the local library. Using their free Wi-Fi, the headline was understated. Vance Entertainment announces major restructuring, shifts focus to community initiatives. The article detailed a new direction for the massive company, a pivot away from aggressive expansion and toward a more community-focused model. It mentioned the creation of the Vance Foundation for Family Recreation, a new charitable arm dedicated to funding public parks, community centers, and arts programs for underprivileged children. At the end of the article, there was a quote from Serafina Vance, her first public statement since her return. "We believe that the true measure of our success is not in our profits, but in the joy and connection we can foster in the communities we serve. It's time we invested in what truly matters." Leo read the article 3 times, the words blurring slightly on the small screen. This wasn't the cutthroat, corporate heiress he had imagined. This was different. This was the woman who had listened to his stories, who had laughed with his daughter, who had spoken of her own father's lost dreams. He felt a strange mix of emotions, admiration, confusion, and a new, unfamiliar pang of hope. Later that day, a second piece of news arrived. This time, in a letter addressed to the library where he had been volunteering. It was from the newly formed Vance Foundation, a formal announcement of their first community project, a complete renovation and expansion of the Cedar Falls Public Library, including the creation of a new, fully funded children's wing with a dedicated arts and crafts space, a space for the art class Maya had so desperately wanted to join. The letter was signed by the Foundation's new Director of Community Outreach, a name Leo didn't recognize. But as he stood there, in the quiet, dusty library, surrounded by books and the gentle hum of a community trying to make do with what little it had, he knew it was her doing. It was another grand gesture, another act of quiet, anonymous help. But this time, it didn't feel like charity. It felt like a message that said, "I heard you. I see you. What you value matters." He thought of the undeposited check still sitting in his kitchen drawer. It was a symbol of his pride, of his fear of being her project, but maybe he had been looking at it all wrong. Maybe it wasn't about him being a project, maybe it was about him being her inspiration. He walked home in a daze, the librarian's joyful, tearful words echoing in his ears that evening. He sat down with Maya at their kitchen table. He pulled out a piece of paper and a crayon. "I need you to help me with something," he said. "I need you to draw me a picture of a bridge." Maya tilted her head. "What kind of bridge?" "A strong one," Leo said, his voice thick with an emotion he couldn't name. "One that connects two places that are very far apart." As Maya began to draw, her small hand moving with a confident certainty, Leo knew what he had to do. He couldn't let pride be the reason their story ended. He had to build a bridge of his own. The drive was long, the minivan's engine humming a steady, familiar tune as the miles rolled by. Leo had deposited the check, not with a sense of defeat, but with a feeling of investment. An investment in a future he was finally brave enough to consider. He had paid his back rent, fixed the car's transmission, and used the rest to fund this trip, a quiet, unannounced journey to the city. To the world she inhabited, he didn't have a plan, no grand speech prepared. He just knew he had to show up. He had to close the distance. He had let fear create. He found her company's headquarters easily. A gleaming tower of glass and steel that seemed to scrape the sky. It was an intimidating alien landscape, a world of power and wealth that was designed to make men like him feel small, but as he stood on the marble plaza, looking up at the Vance Entertainment logo, he didn't feel small, he just felt determined. He walked into the lobby, his work boots silent on the polished floor, Maya's hand held tightly in his. He carried a single, rolled-up piece of paper, her drawing of the bridge, the receptionist, a woman with a sleek haircut and a practiced, impersonal smile, looked up, her expression a mix of confusion and mild alarm. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone implying that he was clearly in the wrong place. "I'm here to see Serafina Vance," Leo said, his voice calm and steady. The receptionist's eyebrows shot up. "Do you have an appointment?" "No," Leo admitted, "but please tell her Leo Stanton is here." The name clearly meant nothing to her. She was about to dismiss him, to call security, when a voice cut through the lobby's quiet hum. "It's all right, Helen. I'll take it from here." Serafina stood at the top of a grand, sweeping staircase, her posture poised, her expression unreadable. She wore a tailored dress, the uniform of her world, but her eyes, when they met his, were filled with a raw, unguarded emotion that shattered her corporate facade. She descended the stairs slowly, her gaze never leaving his, the bustling lobby seeming to fade into the background around them. She stopped a few steps from him, the space between them charged with a year's worth of unspoken words. "You came," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I had to," he said, his own voice thick. "You built a bridge. I figured it was my turn to cross it." He unrolled the drawing and held it out to her. Maya's crayon bridge, strong and colorful, stretched across the page, connecting a small, humble house on one side with a tall, shining tower on the other. Serafina took the drawing, her fingers brushing his, and a single tear traced a path down her cheek. She didn't wipe it away. She let him see it. A crack in the armor, a symbol of the vulnerability she had only ever shown to him. "Is it strong enough?" she asked, her voice breaking. "We'll make it strong enough," he replied, taking her hand, his calloused fingers lacing through her smooth ones. Together, and in the middle of that cold, marble lobby, surrounded by the trappings of her empire, they were no longer a billionaire and a carpenter. They were just Leo and Sarah, two people who had found in each other a home. They had stopped believing they would ever find the Carnival was back in town. A year to the day since they had first met, the lights were just as bright, the music just as loud, the air just as thick with the scent of popcorn and possibility. But this time, everything was different. Leo walked the midway, not as a cleanup crew member, but as a partner. His hand held firmly in Sarah's. Maya danced ahead of them, her face painted with a glittering butterfly, her one-eyed rabbit replaced by a giant, fluffy tiger she had won with her own 2 hands at a game that was, for the first time, not rigged. Sarah had seen to that she had transformed her company from the inside out, her quiet revolution sending ripples through the industry. The Vance Foundation was thriving, building parks and funding libraries in forgotten towns across the country, with Leo at her side as a co-director, his practical, grounded perspective the perfect balance to her visionary ambition. They had moved out of the city, buying a small, rambling farmhouse with a big yard and a bigger workshop for Leo, a place where Maya could run free, and they could build a life that was a blend of both of their worlds, honest and real. With just enough magic to keep things interesting, they stopped at the Ferris wheel, the same one that had stood as a silent witness to their first conversation. "Ready to go up?" Sarah asked, a playful glint in her eye. Leo looked at her, at the woman who had seen past his worn-out clothes and empty wallet to the man he was, at the woman he had almost let his pride push away. "With you?" he said, his voice full of a love that was steady and sure. "Always." As the Ferris wheel carried them up toward the stars, the vibrant, chaotic world of the Carnival spread out below them. Maya sat between them, her small hands clutching theirs, her face a mask of pure, unadulterated joy. Leo looked from his daughter's glowing face to the woman beside him, and he knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that this was what wholeness felt like. It wasn't about fixing what was broken. It was about building something new, something stronger, something together. The ride reached the very top, pausing for a moment to let them take in the breathtaking view of the world bathed in light. "You know," Sarah said, her head resting on his shoulder, her voice a soft murmur against the night air. "I think this is what my father always wanted, not the empire, not the profits, but this." Leo squeezed her hand. "He would be proud of you. I think," she said, her eyes shining with unshed tears, "he'd be proud of us." And as the wheel began its slow, gentle descent back to the solid ground, Leo knew their story wasn't a fairy tale of a poor man being rescued by a rich woman. It was a story of 2 lost souls who had found in each other the courage to build a home, not of glass and steel, but of love, trust, and the quiet, unshakable magic of a second chance.